To the U.S. now. New details are out surrounding the police failures during the 2022 school shooting in Uvalde, Texas. 19 children and 2 teachers were killed and 17 others were injured. A new U.S. Department of Justice report says children's lives may have been saved if officers had responded differently to the gunman. U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland provided details on the 600-page report earlier.
As a consequence of failed leadership, training and policies, injured and scared students and teachers remain trapped with the subject in the classrooms waiting to be rescued. Survivors later shared that they heard officers gathered outside the classrooms while they waited.
The CBC's Richard Madden is on the story live from Washington. So Richard, tell us more about this report and what more Garland had to say.
Yeah, Andrew, this critical incident report was 20 months in the making, and Attorney General Merrick Garland not mincing his words, blasting what he calls cascading failures by the Uvalde police in response to that deadly school shooting almost 2 years ago. Now, Garland says lives would have been saved if officers acted sooner, saying the students were trapped inside Robb Elementary School for more than an hour after the 911 calls first came in, as a gunman opened fire, killing nearly 24 fourth graders and their teacher. Now, Garland says police didn't rush towards the sound of gunfire. Instead, they just stopped, treating the shooter as a barricaded subject and not a threat to the students' lives. Garland called that the single most critical tactical failure. He then raised the mass confusion at the scene. Officers didn't know what to do, who was in charge, or how to proceed, saying police demonstrated no urgency as the deadly shooting unfolded. Listen.
As I told families and survivors last night, the department's review concluded that a series of major failures in leadership, in tactics, in communications, in training, and in preparedness were made by law enforcement leaders and others responding to the mass shooting at Robb Elementary.
Now, in all, 77 minutes passed before the shooter was eventually killed by a SWAT team, and there was more chaos in the aftermath. Garland says police put survivors with bullet wounds onto buses without getting them crucial medical treatment. Other officers told some families their children died when, in fact, they did not. It should be noted this is the second worst mass shooting in U.S. history. And Garland noted many of these officers weren't trained on how to deal with an active shooter. Now, some families watching in the background were clearly frustrated and emotional as they listened to the descriptions of the horrendous breakdown by law enforcement.
And now that the report is released, what happens next?
Yeah, that's the big question. What happens next is what will be done with this information? Who else will be held accountable? Will anyone face criminal charges? Keep in mind, this was once a tight-knit border community that's now being torn apart. Many police officers were friends, neighbors. They're all now being forced to relive this trauma, the anxiety, the grief. Families have long been demanding answers and justice, including Kimberly Mata-Rubio, whose daughter Lexi was among the victims at Robb Elementary. Let's take a listen.
I hope that the failures end today and that local officials do what wasn't done that day, do right by the victims and survivors of Robb Elementary. Terminations, criminal prosecutions. Robb Elementary began the day an 18-year-old wasn't allowed to purchase an AR-15.
Now, you can hear the anger and frustration in her voice. Many others are saying there's not much new in this report that hasn't already been uncovered by reporters or other investigations, most notably the Texas Steakhouse. And I should also mention, moments ago, Andrew, President Biden issued a statement on this report, and I'm quoting here. Congress must now pass common sense safety laws to ensure that mass shootings like this one don't happen in the first place. We need universal background checks. We need a national red flag law, and we must ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. Now, Democrats are raising the gun control issue as America begins an election year.
Richard, thank you. That is the CBC's Richard Madden, live in Washington.